My name is Sachin, and I look after investments at Acumen. I'm going to take you through our work on portfolio. Let me just start with some of the highlight numbers of the work in portfolio. Acumen has to date invested $113 million into 77 companies, which we currently actively hold in our portfolio. Now, Carlyle spoke about the patient capital approach. And it's important that some of the capital that we invest comes back to Acumen. And the promise of the patient capital approach is that we will recycle and reinvest this capital into the portfolio. A number I definitely wanted to show you is that $31 million has come back from Acumen's portfolio and been returned and recycled into the next innovative idea, which could change the way the world tackles poverty. But of course, the return for Acumen, while partly being financial, is also importantly to impact the low-income consumer that all of us at Acumen are focused on. And one of the big numbers which I feel proud about is that $113 million has impacted 232 million lives of people who are looking for critical products and services in the countries that we work in. Now, $113 million and the problem of poverty seem like, the problem of poverty seems like a big issue, and $113 million still could seem like a fairly limited number. But the important thing about Acumen's work, in my opinion, is to create those ideas with small amounts of capital, which other people can back to take to true scale and to tens of millions of people more. And I say it again with great pride that the just over $100 million that we've invested, those companies have attracted more than $500 million of capital through equity or debt coming into them. And those young companies and early stage entrepreneurs that we backed have actually now got a leverage of 1:5 of Acumen's capital to continue and expand the work that is done. Carlyle spoke about the first pie chart, which is the sectors that we work in. I wanted to focus on the second and the third. Acumen at heart is a risk-taking organization. We don't get scared by the early stage enterprise or a problem which has not been solved for the last 10 years. And 2/3 of our capital actually goes into new investments to continue to push the envelope and push the boundary on what could be a private sector solution for this knotty and difficult problem which has not been solved for a period of time. And the last pie chart shows that we, in 60% of the cases, invest the most risky type of capital. So we're not trying to be safe, that we will invest debt and we will get it back with a 12% return. We actually go in and put equity into most of our companies to take on the risk which early stage investing, early stage social enterprises have by default. This is an interesting chart. I'm presenting it for the first time, so bear with me. This shows the spread of Acumen's work across the world. And as you can see, it's quite a good spread across this map of the world that we have over there. The two things that I want to make over here. In each of these geographies, we are focused on the low-income consumer living in poverty. So we have not diverted at all from the base consumer segment which Acumen wants to impact. The second thing I think which is interesting and worth noting about this spread is that in every region, the work is being done by local teams. So it is not people in New York or in London who are investing into Nigeria or Ghana or Colombia or Peru. It is people who are from those regions who are actually sitting there, understand the issues and problems which are doing this work. But the most interesting thing which is happening with this particular chart is the transfer of knowledge and insights from one region to the other. So while we have local teams, and just to take an example, if you take India right on one end of the chart, when we went into education, we were, of course, focused on schools and children. But we quickly discovered that one of the biggest problems for India is that people who are passing out of school are not employable. So the Indian school system in some cases can be so broken that when those people even go and start working as a checkout clerk in a shop, they are not employable. And one of the things that we started doing is providing bridge programs so that people who got out of school were able to go through a 3 to 6 month program, which then prepared them to actually work in the workforce. And that is what we call workforce development. The interesting thing is that America, the United States, where we started our work much, much later, also has a workforce development program. And so, in a strange way, learnings that we got from India are actually now moving westward to the United States. And some of those principles are being applied, things that we learned in India, in the US, again, to make young people employable and get jobs which can take them ahead. And I think as our work grows in each one of these geographies, cross-pollination of ideas, of solutions for people who live in poverty, of business solutions is going to be a huge, it's going to be very powerfully coming out of all the regions that we work in. Now I'm going to move into one of the sectors and describe to you evolution. Because I actually think that Acumen cannot do the same things again and again. Even the things we've succeeded in, just to do them again and again is not the DNA of Acumen. But the sector I'm going to talk about is actually energy. And for some of you in the room, it might be a little bit of a surprise because energy is the hot sector. It's talked about all the time. Everybody from Google Ventures to Shell to others are talking about the renewable energy sector. The reason I'm going to talk about it is because energy permeates the life. When a student goes to a school, a young child, and switches on a computer for the first time, when a patient goes to a hospital and gets a blood test done to check if they have malaria, when a farmer tills his field, it's all got energy running through all of those. And therefore, I'm going to talk about this difficult and interesting sector. But let me remind you about the problem. On this planet, there are still 1.3 billion people who live without access to electricity. And the second number is interesting. Everybody today is talking about universal access. That, how can we get universal access to everybody without electricity? It's going to cost $45 billion a year, invested till 2030, to give people universal access. How much is the money today going into the electricity sector? It is in the region of about $20 billion. So less than half of the money required for universal access is going into universal access. And when I was at a conference recently, therefore, there was an increasing realization from the government, from people like the World Bank and the IFC, that private sector solutions have to therefore be a part of pushing universal access. And that's exactly the sort of role that Acumen has been playing. This lays out our energy portfolio in South Asia and Africa. I think we can say with a great amount of confidence that Acumen was the first organization to start investing in what today is called the off-grid renewable energy sector. We have the largest portfolio across subsectors. So if you take cook stoves, if you take mini grids, and if you take solar home systems, we have sort of the biggest spread. And I do think we have insights about what it takes to build companies and what it takes to really impact low-income households in the sector, which position us, I think, at the forefront of doing this. And this is sort of a quick report card on what we've done in energy. $22 million into 20 companies. The interesting number, which I calculated on the back of the envelope a little while ago, was the 22 million. Now think of the 22 million being used to give away a product which costs, say, $40. So with 22 million, you'd give away about 500,000 products. If that 500,000 products impacted 5 people per product, the average size of a household in many of these countries, you would get impact on roughly 3 million people. 500,000 products into 5, 2.5, or thereabout. So 3 million people is what you would get if you had given away products with the 22 million. Look at the last number. With 22 million, we have impacted 81 million people. Not 3, not 30, but 81 million people. And I think that is the leverage of the private sector enterprise, and that is the leverage of Acumen's work of investing into early stage companies to create enterprises which then become sustainable and keep impacting people much after Acumen's initial investment would have got used up had it been used to just give away products to people. Now, in this sector, I think there is still a question about what Acumen should be doing. A lot of the financial press talks about tens, sometimes even hundreds of millions of dollars getting invested in precisely those companies which Acumen invested in 10, 11, 15 years ago. So we are seeing that in the Financial Times or in the Wall Street Journal, and it all seems very exciting. The question, therefore, I asked myself 2 years ago is Acumen's work done? And should we hand over the energy sector to other investors who have more capital and who can put in these tens and hundreds of millions of dollars into single companies? And the answer on reflection I found to that question was no. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of what we are doing in energy. And I'm hoping that at the end of it, I convince you that the pioneer energy approach that Acumen, the pioneer investing approach that Acumen uses is still not only relevant, it's required and it's desperately required for the energy sector. Let me start first with where Acumen started. We invested into solar home system companies, and we invested capital behind these companies when nobody knew whether the low-income consumer wanted a solar product. Nobody knew what price they were willing to pay for it. Nobody knew how to get a great product to the low-income consumer in rural Tanzania. And for a regular investor, it was like, oh my God, this is very risky. The return is very uncertain. And God, the effort it will take to make this happen is going to exhaust the hell out of us. It was at that point in time that Acumen took on the high risk, said we will deal with the fact that returns are low and need to rise, and we will exhaust ourselves and put in the effort to actually invest behind companies like M-Copa, like D-Light Design, at a very, very early stage in their evolution, when they were really garage houses with somebody tinkering around with the product. Today, those companies are the ones which are taking in the tens and the hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's the leverage of Acumen's work. So that sounds like success. That sounds like work done. Let's celebrate. Let me take you to another geography. It's a country which I'm sure all of you have heard the name of, called Sierra Leone. It's on the western coast of Africa, 7 million people. It's been hit by Ebola and by civil war in the last decade. 90% of those 7 million people live off the grid. 90%, 1 in 9. More than 6 million people out of 7 off the grid in that particular country. And recent estimates indicate that it will take till 2080, for universal access in Sierra Leone. Now, are any of those tens of millions of dollars going to Sierra Leone? I'm afraid the answer is no. And the reason is the same. It's too risky, the return is too uncertain, and for God's sakes, it's going to take too much effort to get solar home systems to those people in Sierra Leone. So who is going to do that work? And the answer is that Acumen is. We have, as recently as 3 months ago, made our first investment into Sierra Leone and our first investment into a renewable energy company over there, which is going to take that solar home system revolution, which is happening in Kenya and Tanzania and Rwanda, but take on the risk of taking it to Sierra Leone. And I hope and I'm confident that with Acumen taking that early stage risk, with $500,000 of investment, 6 to 7 years later, tens of millions of dollars will be invested into this company called Easy Solar to actually carry that solar revolution forward into newer parts of Sierra Leone or newer parts of West Africa. So that's the first thing we are doing, going into those terrible, difficult markets which nobody else is willing to go to. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is on community systems. So community systems, which are often called mini-grids, are a central generating unit with about 50 to 200 households which get energy from that central unit. Now, none of these mini-grids have today been sustainable financially serving low-income households. And most of the models that we see in mini-grids are either becoming captive to industry or they are linking into the national grid. As you can tell, if you're serving industry or if you're serving the national grid, you are not serving the off-grid low-income consumer, which we are focused on. Acumen continues to be focused on finding the solutions to make this sustainable. And let me give you one of the areas that me and my colleagues in the energy space look at. It's called metering. Now, if you could get a good metering system into every household in a mini-grid, you could know who's using the energy, and you could know how much energy are they using. And if you know both of those, you can bill and you can get revenue from the consumers, which will make the mini-grid sustainable. So building this ecosystem of the mini-grid is something that we are working really hard towards. And the last thing that we're focusing on energy is the most exciting for me, which is the value that a consumer gets is not from an electron flowing through a wire. The value that a consumer gets is based on what that electron does. And that electron can help a student do homework after the sun goes down. That electron can help a woman feel safer when she has to leave the house after dark. That electron can work when a farmer feels that he has energy to till the land and to do irrigation. And so the uses of energy, the productive uses of energy, is something that, again, it's early stage, it's risky, the companies are very difficult to find, leave alone invest into. But at Acumen, we will keep pushing to find the right solution so that the electron is used for every consumer who needs it. And that really is a summary of the evolution of Acumen's work from the initial investments into M-Copa and D-Light to what I was just talking about today. And what excites me about this, I think, the most is that we could stop today at Acumen and we could say we've impacted 10, 20 million people. But if we have to provide renewable energy to the 1.3 billion people who don't have it today, we cannot stop, and we have to continue doing the pioneering investing work that is now in the DNA of Acumen. Thank you.